It was supposed to be a perfect living situation, 4 friends sharing the same roof, balancing academic pressures with moments of relaxation. But beneath the laughter and casual conversations, a seed of doubt began to grow. This young man wasn't sure when it started to feel like something was wrong, but the signs were there: unexplained absences, evasive answers, and an innocent comment from the neighbor that set off an alarm that couldn't be ignored. Now he found himself trapped between love and doubt, trying to figure out whether his sweet, shy girlfriend was hiding a secret capable of destroying everything. I suspect something is going on between my girlfriend and my friend. We all live together. Am I imagining things? For context, I'm 22, my girlfriend is 22, and my friend is 21. I'm really freaking out right now because if what I suspect is true, this living situation is going to get really complicated. Please tell me I'm crazy. Sorry if this is long, here's the context. We're 2 couples living together, all attending the same university. The apartment was originally rented by my girlfriend of about 2 years, Alexis, and our mutual friend Brooke, also 22. The apartment is huge and expensive. Originally, there were supposed to be 3 girls living there, but the last one dropped out suddenly. They were planning to move to a cheaper place, but they had invested a lot in the apartment and loved it so much that they hated the idea of leaving. I offered to move in when my lease ended in May so we could split the rent and utilities in 3. I had already been staying there frequently anyway. Both girls were absolutely thrilled with the idea. Just before I moved in, Brooke started dating my best friend, Derek. It was great because now both couples could hang out with their best friends and girlfriends at the same time. It seemed perfect. Derek started staying there frequently, and when his parents sold their house and moved in October, he temporarily moved in as well. We didn't pressure him too much to find a new place because splitting everything 4 ways was really helping all of us. But again, only Alexis and Brooke are on the lease. Surprisingly, the landlord doesn't mind as long as the rent is paid because we're always quiet. There are 3 incidents that made me think something was going on. If it weren't for these combined incidents, I would never make such an accusation because Alexis is a very sweet and shy girl, and Derek has been like a brother to me. They don't seem to flirt, but as I mentioned earlier, the 4 of us are very close friends, so we spend a lot of time together. Incident 1, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Brooke and I have early classes, so we leave at 8 a.m. Derek and Alexis start later in the day, so it's not uncommon for them to leave together, though they usually take separate cars. One of those days, I decided to wait for Alexis outside her class to surprise her with lunch. I saw everyone leave the class, but Alexis wasn't among them. I texted her asking where she was, and she replied, "I just left class, I'm heading home to study." I called her to see if I missed her by just a few seconds or something, but there was no answer, which I found strange because she had just texted me seconds earlier. She didn't respond until much later, which is also unusual for her. She's one of those girls who's always on the phone. Later that day, I ran into Brooke, and she casually mentioned that Derek had stayed home sick, and she was going to bring him some soup, etc. At the time, I didn't think much of it. When I got home later that night, I noticed Alexis' car was exactly in the same spot where she usually parks in the visitor's lot because our unit only has 3 spots, so her car moves a lot. I asked if she had gone to class, and she was quiet before sheepishly admitting that she skipped it because she thought the teacher explained things poorly. But she knows I hate it when she skips classes, something that had already affected her grades before, though she had recently started improving. I kissed her and told her I trusted her. While I was washing the dishes, she explained how she probably wouldn't skip classes anymore because staying home bored was the worst. I laughed, and we continued with our chores. That night we went to bed, and while I was almost falling asleep, it occurred to me, she shouldn't be alone because Derek was at home sick, right? She was still awake on the phone, so I suddenly woke up and asked where Derek was today since Brooke had said he was home sick. She seemed a bit startled by the question, but it might have been because I was half asleep and suddenly asked her a random question. She said he had been here a little in the morning but had left to take care of some things or something like that. She wasn't sure. After the other incidents, I realized that the way she answered that question, distractedly, seemed strange, but it could just be my imagination. Incident 2. I was throwing some things in the kitchen trash when I noticed a condom wrapper that was exactly the same brand Alexis and I use. It wasn't super visible, half hidden behind a cereal box, but the distinct color caught my attention. Brooke and Derek always use a different, free brand from the campus health center, while ours is the Trojan brand. It was strange because we usually keep the trash in our respective room bins, so they never end up in the kitchen. Also, due to exams and general stress, Alexis and I hadn't had sex in a few days. I didn't search for a used condom or anything like that, I just went back to the room to check if any of ours were missing. I really couldn't tell because we buy in bulk. My first thought was that Brooke and Derek had finished and grabbed from our stash, and I was upset that they didn't even ask. Later that night, I mentioned the condom wrapper to Alexis, and her eyes widened when I mentioned my theory. She seemed unusually distressed. She's usually very calm and started complaining about them violating our privacy. I suggested we talk to them about it, and she immediately dismissed the idea and made me promise not to bring it up unless they did it again. She didn't want to have that awkward conversation, which was strange to me because we're usually very open about sex, considering we live together, though it's possible Alexis was being genuine because she's from a conservative town and doesn't talk about these things as much as we do. Incident 3, Derek and I are friends with the guys from the apartment next door, who are graduates from our university. We don't hang out together or anything, but we have that kind of relationship where we chat casually about sports or anything else in the hallway, and we feel comfortable asking each other to keep the noise down without it being awkward. Last Monday, during our break, I was locking the door when no one else was in the apartment when I ran into one of the guys from the apartment next door. We talked about football for a while, and then he mentioned that one of the couples in the apartment really liked mornings, and the walls were very thin. I laughed because Alexis and I usually did it on weekend mornings when we had the place to ourselves. Brooke and Derek usually spend weekends at her parents' house, about an hour and a half away. The more I thought about it throughout the day, the more I realized that we hadn't done it in the mornings for about a month. On weekends it was more towards the end of the day or not at all. Did he mean during the week? My heart kind of dropped. I wanted to ask him for more details, but the conversation ended, and I felt like I missed my chance. Also, it's a strange thing to ask, and I feel like I must be being paranoid. So, that's it, Reddit. Am I crazy? Am I looking for signs that aren't there, or is something going on? And if so, how should I proceed? I don't want to ask her yet because 1, I don't want to look crazy and jealous if nothing's happening, and 2, if something is happening, I don't want them to start hiding it. Maybe I should try showing up one of these mornings when they're alone, but I'm not sure how to time it right. If I show up too early or too late, they might become more cautious. Update, most of you suggested I talk to Brooke and or try to catch them in the act. I decided to do both. Sunday night, everyone was back at the apartment. My plan was to talk to Brooke about the neighbor's comment, but before I could, she said something that completely threw my theory out the window. She told Derek to go to bed so he wouldn't get tired for work in the morning. What? I knew Derek had a job on campus, but he always worked the same night shift. Trying to be as casual as possible, I asked how long he had been working mornings and when he started. He said he started picking up extra shifts a month ago and worked at 9 a.m. I leave at 7:45 a.m., so it's possible I hadn't noticed. I spent the rest of the night trying to figure out if he was lying about it, if he still had some mornings at home, if Alexis could be seeing someone else besides Derek in the mornings, as some of you suggested, or again if I was just being a paranoid loser. I went to bed feeling emotionally drained and confused. While I was washing the dishes, she explained how she probably wouldn't skip classes anymore because staying home bored was the worst. I laughed, and we continued with our chores. That night we went to bed, and while I was almost falling asleep, it occurred to me, she shouldn't be alone because Derek was at home sick, right? She was still awake on the phone, so I suddenly woke up and asked where Derek was today since Brooke had said he was home sick. She seemed a bit startled by the question, but it might have been because I was half asleep and suddenly asked her a random question. She said he had been here a little in the morning but had left to take care of some things or something like that. She wasn't sure. After the other incidents, I realized that the way she answered that question, distractedly, seemed strange, but it could just be my imagination. Incident 2, I was throwing some things in the kitchen trash when I noticed a condom wrapper that was exactly the same brand Alexis and I use. It wasn't super visible, half hidden behind a cereal box, but the distinct color caught my attention. Brooke and Derek always use a different, free brand from the campus health center, while ours is the Trojan brand. It was strange because we usually keep the trash in our respective room bins, so they never end up in the kitchen. Also, due to exams and general stress, Alexis and I hadn't had sex in a few days. I didn't search for a used condom or anything like that, I just went back to the room to check if any of ours were missing. I really couldn't tell because we buy in bulk. My first thought was that Brooke and Derek had finished and grabbed from our stash, and I was upset that they didn't even ask. Later that night, I mentioned the condom wrapper to Alexis, and her eyes widened when I mentioned my theory. She seemed unusually distressed. She's usually very calm and started complaining about them violating our privacy. I suggested we talk to them about it, and she immediately dismissed the idea and made me promise not to bring it up unless they did it again. She didn't want to have that awkward conversation, which was strange to me because we're usually very open about sex, considering we live together, though it's possible Alexis was being genuine because she's from a conservative town and doesn't talk about these things as much as we do. Incident 3, Derek and I are friends with the guys from the apartment next door, who are graduates from our university. We don't hang out together or anything, but we have that kind of relationship where we chat casually about sports or anything else in the hallway, and we feel comfortable asking each other to keep the noise down without it being awkward. Last Monday, during our break, I was locking the door when no one else was in the apartment when I ran into one of the guys from the apartment next door. We talked about football for a while, and then he mentioned that one of the couples in the apartment really liked mornings, and the walls were very thin. I laughed because Alexis and I usually did it on weekend mornings when we had the place to ourselves. Brooke and Derek usually spend weekends at her parents' house, about an hour and a half away. The more I thought about it throughout the day, the more I realized that we hadn't done it in the mornings for about a month. On weekends it was more towards the end of the day or not at all. Did he mean during the week? My heart kind of dropped. I wanted to ask him for more details, but the conversation ended, and I felt like I missed my chance. Also, it's a strange thing to ask, and I feel like I must be being paranoid. So, that's it, Reddit. Am I crazy? Am I looking for signs that aren't there, or is something going on? And if so, how should I proceed? I don't want to ask her yet because 1, I don't want to look crazy and jealous if nothing's happening, and 2, if something is happening, I don't want them to start hiding it. Maybe I should try showing up one of these mornings when they're alone, but I'm not sure how to time it right. If I show up too early or too late, they might become more cautious. Update, most of you suggested I talk to Brooke and or try to catch them in the act. I decided to do both. Sunday night, everyone was back at the apartment. My plan was to talk to Brooke about the neighbor's comment, but before I could, she said something that completely threw my theory out the window. She told Derek to go to bed so he wouldn't get tired for work in the morning. What? I knew Derek had a job on campus, but he always worked the same night shift. Trying to be as casual as possible, I asked how long he had been working mornings and when he started. He said he started picking up extra shifts a month ago and worked at 9 a.m. I leave at 7:45 a.m., so it's possible I hadn't noticed. I spent the rest of the night trying to figure out if he was lying about it, if he still had some mornings at home, if Alexis could be seeing someone else besides Derek in the mornings, as some of you suggested, or again if I was just being a paranoid loser. I went to bed feeling emotionally drained and confused. The next morning, I left for classes as usual and operated on autopilot. I kept alternating between thinking about rushing home to see Alexis and thinking that I had too much work to chase down a theory I wasn't even sure about anymore. In the end, I left my first class and went straight to the car to head home. In a strange way, I kind of wished I hadn't gone. When I arrived at the apartment, Derek's car wasn't there, just Alexis. I didn't know what I was expecting outside the apartment door. I could immediately hear a man's voice inside. I heard him talking and laughing, with a soft female murmur responding and laughing back. I've been on this subreddit long enough to see all the different reactions people have to this situation. I never contemplated what I would do. I pressed my ear to the door to see if I could understand what they were saying, but I only caught one word here and there. There was a lot of laughter, and then I heard Alexis being tickled and screaming. Maybe I should have waited longer. In hindsight, I wish I had, but I couldn't. As soon as I started fiddling with my keys, there was complete silence inside. She was with March. I never mentioned Mar in the previous post, but he's one of the guys from the apartment next door. Not the one who warned me, though. He's the one I've never liked, arrogant, know-it-all attitude, always making inappropriate comments about girls, but I never thought much of it. As soon as I opened the door, both of them looked at me like they had been caught in the act, which erased any naive doubt I had that the situation was innocent. I had planned to yell at them or demand answers, but that was too embarrassing. My eyes started to fill with tears, and I didn't want them to see that, so I just said, "Cool, nice," and walked back to my car. I heard Alexis shouting my name in the hallway, and I quickened my pace. I half expected her to be following me, but when I got to the car, no one was behind me. I drove to a park near the apartment and stayed there in disbelief. My first thought, strangely, was how my family would deal with this, what I would say to them. My family loved Alexis, they joked about our marriage and regularly called her part of the family. Then I started thinking about housing issues. Our final exams end in about 2 weeks, there's no way I can deal with a move right now. I'm applying for an extremely competitive grad program, and I can't let anything get in the way of that. Definitely not a cheater. I'm writing this from a friend's house. I explained the situation to him, and he explained it to his parents, and they took me in. I'll need to go back home to grab some clothes at some point. I'm planning to go during the class period when I know Alexis can't miss tomorrow. It took about an hour for her to start texting me, but once she did, it didn't stop. She started asking me to come home so she could explain. Before I even had a chance to reply, she sent another message begging me to come back because she was having an anxiety attack, something I always help her get through. Maybe I'm insensitive, but all I could think was, well, you deserved it. There was a pause, and then she sent, I don't know why you get so jealous. We were just talking. I waited. She sent, look, I know it looks super suspicious. Believe me, if I were you, I'd think the same thing, but we didn't do anything. He needed advice on problems with girls. You have to believe me. No, I don't. Normally, I would have a strange sense of satisfaction seeing a cheater try to cover their tracks, but my stupid brain kept recalling all those great moments we had together, wondering if she was cheating back then, too. I want to know when this started, but at the same time, I'm worried it's been happening longer than the month I suspected. I got a message later that night from a number I didn't recognize. It was the nice guy from the apartment next door. He said he got my number from Derek. He was extremely sorry for what I was going through and that he would have told me earlier, but wasn't absolutely sure. He said he knew his friend was seeing a girl with a boyfriend, but hadn't connected the dots until he found out the girl's name. As many of you suspected, the comment was him trying to warn me. So, yes, I guess he's the guy of the year. I don't think Derek and Brooke know yet. I haven't told them. I haven't found the words. I know this is going to turn our living arrangements and friendships upside down. I think I should message them before Alexis paints a different picture. I wonder what the nice neighbor said when he asked for my number. I don't think he told them. They would have said something, right? Unless they're siding with her. So now I've lost my girlfriend and my friends. Any advice on how to deal with something like this, especially from anyone who has gone through it before, please let me know. I don't have many friends to turn to except the guy I'm staying with. Alexis, Brooke, and Derek were basically my family. Alexis and I had talked about spending our lives together. I've never been as serious about a girl as I was with her. Edit, I'm really overwhelmed by the amount of support you're giving me here. Please keep commenting. I might not respond to every comment, but I've read every post. I'll tell Derek and Brooke soon. I'll try to give a follow-up once I have some kind of plan. Update, you guys are amazing. Among the comments, in both posts and my inbox, I have an immense collection of personalized motivational conversations that I turn to whenever I feel down. I admit, in these days, I've received advice and stories from all kinds of people, married, single, old, young. Wow, I never thought the internet would bring me this level of support. I just want you all to know that by typing a few comments, you made a very real difference in someone's life. I have to say, it's a bit strange to receive 6 Reddit Gold Awards and make it to the best of Reddit just by sharing the worst day of my life, haha. I've received a lot of messages encouraging me to get into the red pill. This experience soured my view of Alexis, not about women in general. I've received a few messages saying I write too well and that this is obviously made up. I have 2 words for you. I wanted clarification about the last update. It wasn't clear what I saw when I walked in. They weren't literally having sex. They were just sitting on the couch with a discriminatory look, and both were quiet. Obviously, it wasn't a hey, guess who showed up situation. Anyway, here's the update. I've been extremely busy with the end of the semester and took the advice of most to bury my head in work. I spent a lot of time in the library because Alexis never goes there. In the process of posting the last update, I realized how stupid it was not to contact Derek and Brooke with my side of the story. I took a screenshot of the nice neighbor Will's message. Note, all names have been changed except Mark because Mark. In 1 minute, Derek was blowing up my phone with calls and messages that made it very clear that he knew nothing. At the same time, Alexis was sending messages begging to meet up. I was feeling miserable, so I sent a single message to Derek saying I wasn't in the mood to talk, then put my phone away for the night. The next morning, I received a message saying to meet him at my favorite restaurant for dinner and drinks, on him, assuring me that no one would be there, not even Brooke. I haven't had an appetite since all of this happened, but the offer meant a lot, and I really wanted to see him. So I decided to go after class. I got to the restaurant first, and my heart was in my throat, worried Alexis would somehow be there, but she wasn't. Derek came up to me and gave me a big hug and started with, "What the hell happened?" This is where things get a little crazy and dramatic. Many of you suggested that Brooke might side with Alexis or have covered for her all along. I wasn't so sure because, although she's closer to Alexis, she and I have been friends for a little longer. According to Derek, as soon as he told Brooke, she was absolutely furious. In his words, I kind of wanted to curse out Alexis, but Brooke took care of that, and much more. Remember how I said Alexis came from a small, conservative town? Her parents had no idea we were living together, and she constantly emphasized that they couldn't know, or they'd cut her off financially. They liked me enough to be polite, but were always concerned that a relationship would take her away from her studies, and they didn't want her to get pregnant or something. Derek told me that Brooke demanded Alexis pack her things and find a new place, or she would call her parents and tell them everything. Derek told me that later that night, Alexis was sitting in the living room hugging a sweater I left behind and crying loudly that her life was over when Brooke yelled from the bedroom, "Well, maybe you shouldn't have slept with another guy then." Imagining that moment was kind of funny. Brooke's always been a very practical girl with a fiery temper, but I definitely didn't expect that. It was incredibly touching that she took the betrayal so seriously. During that dinner, all my fears of losing my friends were completely dissipated, and I managed to choke down some pieces of sushi. When we left dinner, Derek promised to let me know when Alexis had left so I could go back. I declined the offer because, even if she moves out, everything in that apartment reminds me of her, including Derek and Brooke. Alexis and Mark probably had sex in my room, so I really don't want to sleep there. 3. In the emotional state I'm in, I don't want to be the third wheel in a happy couple, though I'm sure they would be considered a couple. He understood my points but said to let him know if I changed my mind because the friendship between Brooke and Alexis seems to be over. This week has been pretty monotonous, but I still have to avoid Alexis. Fortunately, I'm in a graduate program with only 60 students, so we have a lot of classes together. I asked 2 friends to keep an eye on her after giving them a summary of the story and started arriving at classes at the last minute. As far as I know, she only waited outside one of my classes. I got a message saying she was spotted in front of room X, crying, "Proceed with caution." I ended up skipping the class because I didn't know if she would leave, and I really didn't want to risk it. Later that night, she sent me a long message on Facebook explaining everything from the beginning, and that kind of left me disgusted to read. I thought about not reading it, but once I opened it, I had to read it. She said he was flirting with her in the hallways. As I mentioned before, he would say inappropriate things to the girls, and she tried to be friendly back, but it must have seemed like flirting because he kissed her in the middle of a sentence one day. She said she felt guilty for giving him hope, and that guilt stopped her from rejecting his future advances because she felt it was her fault, and she has trouble saying no. What is this crap? She said they only had sex 3 times, and she hated it. He forced her into it, not rape, but I don't know, she never said yes either. And she was going to break up with him during the conversation when I caught them. She said she would understand if I needed space and time, but that she would do absolutely anything to fix things and spend the rest of her life making it up to me, treating me like a king. I would never have to cook, clean, or wash my clothes again, giving me full access to her phone and passwords. She even suggested I track her location so I would know where she was all the time, cutting off all contact with Mark and all her male friends just to make sure. I guess make up sex whenever I wanted. Yeah, this sounds like a healthy relationship, right? I didn't respond. I kind of wanted to keep her on Facebook and watch the horror show unfold. She was posting dramatic statuses and song lyrics about mistakes, forgiveness, and some of our songs. But I know how I am, I didn't want to compulsively check her page or go through old photos, so I blocked her. Derek messaged me a few hours later saying she's crying and screaming because I blocked her, lol. In happier news, the family I'm staying with is fantastic. I felt a little guilty for taking up their space, electricity, etc., so I offered to pay rent and some bills. I'm unemployed, but my family gives me a decent allowance for rent and food, but they refused. The dad said the first month was free. If I need more time here, then we'll talk about it. My friend told me they've already hosted problematic friends of his and his sister, so it wasn't a big deal. Still, I'm incredibly grateful. As for Will, the amazing neighbor, I called to thank him for everything. I wasn't ready to invite him to dinner yet, but I will. He apologized profusely. He said he couldn't stand Mark, not just for what he did to Alexis but for many other things I won't get into. He told me Mark had been unusually quiet in the past few days and told one of the other guys he was dumped. Whatever, I don't want to think about it. So, that's what I have for you. I'll still be friends with Derek and Brooke, but I'll limit contact with them because they remind me too much of Alexis. I sent a message to Brooke thanking her for kicking Alexis out, and she said she would have done that regardless of whether I came back or not. She'll let me know when Alexis leaves so I can pick up the rest of my things. In the meantime, I'm spending a lot of time studying, applying to grad programs, and hanging out with the guy I'm living with. Earlier this week, I posted in my university's Facebook group looking for roommates for next semester, and I've already gotten some responses. I'll wait until after finals to tell my parents about the situation because my mom asks a million questions about everything, and I'm not in the mood to answer them. Once again, thank you for all the messages. I didn't expect this level of attention, and although it's made me a little paranoid that someone will recognize the story from the details, I don't care, I needed the support. I love you all. Update TR. Well, I really wasn't planning on updating, but many of you asked for one, and I owe it to you after all the wonderful support I received. As soon as finals were over, I did well under the circumstances, but everything hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, almost worse than the initial offense. I removed all my photos on social media with her, threw away things that reminded me of her, took our songs off my playlists, etc. We were inseparable since we met, so that's over 2 years of accumulated memories. Long story short, it was very hard, but I felt a need to do all of this before the new year. That cliché of new year, new life, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, one particular editor sent me a message about how Alexis might be heading toward self-harm now that she's lost everything, her closest friends, her boyfriend, and her apartment. I know it sounds like an exaggerated forecast, but I couldn't get it out of my head. After reading what Alexis did, it was absolutely terrible, but I felt like a final conversation could give me better closure and maybe help her understand that it's completely over and help her move on. So I planned to meet her before everyone went home for the holidays. Many of you were in favor of ignoring her, so I apologize for disappointing you. But I needed to do this for myself. I sent a message to Alexis saying that if she wanted to talk, we could meet somewhere, but there was no way we could be together after what happened, so please don't ask. She replied almost immediately, asking when and where. We agreed to meet at a cafe off campus. When I got there, she was already sitting at a table and stood up to hug me. I pushed her away, and she recoiled like a puppy that was kicked. I felt bad immediately, but I wanted to get this over with. We made some small talk. She asked how I was doing, how the exams went, etc., but I kind of interrupted and asked if she was unhappy with our relationship. Her eyes widened, and she said no several times and went quiet. So I asked why she wasn't unhappy. She basically retold the story about having trouble saying no, and he being so persistent. I interrupted and told her to stop with the excuses and take responsibility. Maybe that would explain her actions until he kissed her in the middle of a sentence, but sleeping with him 3 times, no. She looked down, shrugged, and murmured, "You're right, I know." At that point, she started crying and said she was very sorry, that I would never understand how sorry she was. Then she asked if there was any chance we could be together again, which I kind of expected, even after telling her not to ask. I just shook my head and told her she could still stay with Derek and Brooke if she wanted to, but she refused and told me she already had plans to move in with another friend of hers. From there, the conversation went in circles, with her trying to justify her actions by saying she had difficulty turning guys down because of the fear of being seen as cold, and me trying to make her admit that excuse was nonsense. I don't know why, I just needed her to stop using that crutch and admit that she ruined a perfectly good relationship with a very real future, completely alone. But she just wouldn't admit it. She was always stubborn. Eventually, I let it go, and we parted ways somewhat amicably. When I was leaving, she held my hand and opened her mouth to say something, but ended up shaking her head and dropping the conversation. It made me feel worse than before, at first, but in the end, it really made me see that she was never the kind of person I wanted to be with, even without the betrayal. She never took responsibility for anything. Failed classes were because the professor was incompetent, not getting a job or internship was about luck and not her lack of effort, etc. I just never thought much about it. I think I was still in the honeymoon phase or something like that. I'm an idiot sometimes. So, at that point, I left the cafe and called Derek to hang out. I ended up going to the apartment, and although Brooke was there, she stayed mostly in the room. We drank some beers and played some video games. That really cheered me up. We also talked a bit about everything that happened. He admitted they couldn't find a third roommate other than complete strangers who preferred not to move in, and asked me again to stay with them. I could see that he really wanted me to stay, and I felt guilty that they were stuck with the lease, so I agreed. I told them I'd need to wait until Alexis took all her stuff. The furniture is hers from before I moved in, and I still don't want to sleep in that bed. Also, Brooke apologized for getting so involved in the situation and yelling at Alexis. Apparently, her stepfather cheated on her mother, and it's a sensitive issue for her. I told her I really didn't mind and that she could do it again if she wanted. I also bought food and drinks for Will at a great place near the campus. Many of you wanted to know what other stuff Mark did that made Will so mad. Apparently, he had to be nagged to pay the rent, claimed he couldn't contribute to any of the household expenses, like detergent, light bulbs, cleaning products, and regularly came in yelling and laughing at odd hours, agreeing to keep the volume down, but then continuing at the same volume. The typical roommate shit. Will is really a great guy. We talked a lot about the situation with Alexis but also about college and sports. It was really fun. Eventually, I told my parents about the situation, and as expected, my mom bombarded me with 1,000 questions and cried a lot, so that was fun. Going home made me feel a bit better, but my older brother got engaged on Christmas Eve, and given the recent circumstances, I wasn't as excited for him as I should have been, which made me feel like a shitty brother. Also, it's all my family talks about now, and I'm just not in the mood. Life isn't perfect right now, but I'm getting better. Alexis took her things, and I bought a second-hand bed and dresser from another student. I had my first round of classes last week, and although I'm going to sound like a total nerd, the courses are really cool, practical, and the professors are amazing people. Derek and Brooke have been very supportive and don't make me feel like a third wheel in a happy couple. I saw Mark in the hallway once, and he totally ignored me, and I ignored him, but the urge to punch him in the face was very real. I think that's something that will fade with time. I almost wanted to confront him about everything, but with the kind of person we'll describe him as, the conversation would have gotten me nowhere and probably just made me angrier. Sorry, this update isn't as exciting as the previous ones. Thanks for the love and support, Reddit, it really helped me get through a very tough time. This brings us to the end of this story. It's in moments like these that you really discover who your friends are, and Brooke and Derek are true friends. He shouldn't distance himself from good friends because of the actions of a cheating girlfriend, otherwise, she will hurt him more than she deserves. Alexis had difficulty saying no, and that's why she maintained a constant affair with the neighbor. Seriously, the author handled this perfectly. There are no excuses for betrayal, and the author was more than right in not forgiving Alexis. She needs to understand that her actions have consequences, that regret is real, and that her pretty face, tears of apology, and long apologies won't undo what's been done. I just hope she can learn from this and be a better person in the future. What did you think of this story? What would your advice be for the author? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, show your support for the channel by leaving a like and a comment. Thanks to everyone for watching until the end.